I don't know who you are. I don't know what you want. If you're looking for ransom, I can tell you I don't have money. But what I do have are a very particular set of skills. Skills I've acquired over a very long career. Skills that make me a nightmare for people like you. If you let my daughter go now, that'll be the end of it. I will not look for you. I will not pursue you.
Thank you for watching our PowerPoint presentation. This is obviously brought to you by Team Yellow, and we decided to do our project on sex trafficking. I'm sure a lot of you recalled the audio clip that played in the very first slide of Liam Neeson in the movie Taken. This movie, I feel, brought sex trafficking to the forefront of a lot of people's minds, but sex trafficking and human trafficking has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. And so I'm going to touch briefly on the history of human trafficking and kind of how it morphed into sex trafficking, and then my teammates will take it from there. I think most of us know where sex trafficking started, and that is going to be with the start of the European slave trade in Africa, with the Portuguese transporting people from Africa to Portugal and using them as slaves, and then those plantations and colonies being made where the slaves would go. And of course, the women were raped by the plantation owners. The children that were produced from the rape, they in turn would turn around and work on the plantation until they were old enough, and then sometimes they would even get raped by the plantation owner. So definitely early on, it started out with slavery. So in the early 1900s, the International Agreement for Suppression of White Slave Traffic, I know that's a mouthful, was enacted. And basically what it was is it protected white women from being involved in white slave traffic, and basically it's just exactly what happened in that movie Taken, and what happens all the time is people deceive white women or girls into prostitution, or force them into prostitution. And so this was in the early 1900s. Then in the 1920s, they extended the treaty to traffic in women and children, so that everybody was included and all races were included. Children of both genders were also recognized. And then 2 studies were conducted at this time to kind of find out about the status of the trafficking in certain areas. And then some of the things that they measured were how many women that were trafficked were engaged in prostitution, what the demand was, what kind of environment these women were lived in, and how they were trafficked. And then also they gathered information on the traffickers who actually, who stole them. So it was definitely a step moving forward into the insight of, human and sex trafficking. So as our outliner PowerPoint explained, this is obviously global sex trafficking. This didn't just stay in the United States or in our country. It stayed, it's a worldwide thing that happened. In the 1930s, just to let you know how bad it's gotten, because it's been worse than what it is right now. During World War II, Japan had set up just this outrageous, awful system where women across Asia were forced into sexual slavery. They were housed in these places called comfort stations, and the living conditions were just awful, awful. They incurred beatings and tortures. A lot of these women didn't survive because they were either diseased or malnutritioned or just committed suicide. Um, they could never escape, and the idea was that the Japanese government, had set this up to prevent the spread of diseases and rape, but it really seemed counterintuitive. And then in the 1950s, India had actually initiated um, one of the first acts against to punish those who were involved in sex trafficking, called the Immoral Traffic Prevention Act. And it included anybody who was running brothels or living off of money that they earned from doing sex or from having sex, and capturing anybody who was involved in prostitution. But the act really failed to protect women, I mean, that were forced into prostitution, because a lot of these people are really hard to find. Um, and then, of course, moving into modern days, into the early 1990s, as this started to get talked about even more, um, programs and educational rehabilitation institutions were set up um, for people that had been involved in sex trafficking or victims of sex trafficking, and that kind of leads us to where we're at today. So I'll let one of my counterparts continue on. Thanks so much.
The victims of sex trafficking consist of young women and young girls, also young boys, as well as children, and some young adult men. These traffickers and pimps commonly recruit their potential victims who are either economically or socially vulnerable. These include women, girls, young men who are susceptible to poverty, drug addiction, violence in the family, a history of child sexual abuse, family dysfunction, criminal behavior, school failure. Also, if this can include orphans, women with physical disabilities, and these pimps or traffickers recruit their victims mainly in two popular ways. One is finesse pimping, which involves kindness and compassion by giving gifts and of clothes and cash, luring their victims in, and then the victims feel obligated or indebted to the pimp, which is then the second one is guerrilla pimping, and this involves violence and threats to recruit the women and children, and they are enslaved. Unfortunately, the victims of sex trafficking have a hard time to escape. The traffickers and pimps make it really difficult for them to leave because they make sure that they do not have access to their legal documentation or immigration forms. They make sure that they don't have enough money to leave, and they instill enough fear in them for them not to want to leave. There's also language barriers too that can prevent them from leaving.
Statistical analysis has showed that convictions for sex trafficking have only been as relevant as the year 2000. According to Picture 1, 2009 had 212 people convicted of sex trafficking in the United States. Picture 2 shows that there have only been relatively around 40 people per region that have been publicly convicted of sex trafficking. Continued statistical analysis has shown that throughout the world, sex trafficking has become a troubling industry. Nearly all statistics up until the 21st century have been estimates according to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the United Nations. As of today, first world countries have started to crack down more on sex trafficking within their borders, while others struggle to maintain the lives of their citizens.
Thank you guys so much for watching our PowerPoint presentation on global sex trafficking. We hope that you learned a lot and that you'll be able to use this or identify these types of things out in the world if something like this should ever come across your path. We hope you had a great semester and maybe we'll see you around school.